In an ever-evolving digital landscape, for your business to thrive, you must adapt or die. Welcome to Marketing in the Age of AI, the podcast helping you harness the power of AI and marketing tools to revitalize and grow your business. And now here's your host, marketing expert and author of Authentic Marketing in the Age of AI, Emanuel Rose.
Well, Nicky, it's great to see you today, and I know you've been in the tech industry. It looked like pretty much your entire career, and currently you're the CEO of Fintel Connect. Tell me a little bit more about what you're up to.
Great, thanks very much, and thanks for having me. Fintel's doing something a bit disruptive. We are looking at how affiliate marketing works in the financial industry. When we haven't invented the wheel by any stretch of the imagination, but we are definitely putting a different spin on it when it comes to financial services. So that's the niche that we focus in, and then that's the niche that we expect to dominate. So that's good.
Yeah, that's amazing. What what have you seen in the last 18 months in terms of how generative AI has impacted not just your marketing that you're doing to financial institutions, but how financial institutions are leveraging that?
Financial institutions are leveraging AI gently, I think is probably the best way of actually describing it. I can definitely tell you that they're doing it, and I can definitely tell you that they're doing it in a really interesting way. But I think the fundamental of it is, which you cover day in and day out, AI is a tool. It's a leverageable tool. It's not. It's being able to do what we see AI now probably the way that people saw computers in the 70s. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
they existed in the 60s, they existed before, but just in big rooms, and now we carry them around in our back pocket. And AI, I think, is the next leap from that, with processing power and with data. I saw that one bank is actually looking at earnings statements and putting them into their own AI environment to do analytics on it. Another bank marketer that I know was using it to create different campaigns where they'd looked at an agency and done very well with that, but just was experimenting with the concept of content and images and putting them all together and sort of like put it out there and saw what they came up with. So I think what it is there's a lot of experimentation around not only marketing, but also internal, processing lots of data to come up with different opinions. And I think as people start to understand where it sits, it's a tool. Like in my opinion, I'm not going to let a campaign be decided by artificial intelligence.
Right.
Because there's just a bit too much nuance in it. And, when it comes down to the prompts of it, like if you know your subject matter expertise really, really well, then your prompts are right on. But if you're using it for discovery, then you could be all over the place in terms of what it could be. So it doesn't really answer your question, but I'm seeing it applied in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because the financial industry has got a lot of the data points, right? They've got a lot of dynamic data that can be called on by marketers. I've seen in conversations we're talking between like 3 and 10,000 data points now that we're able to pull for each individual person, which is I don't even know if I know that much about myself at this point, right?
Or that you remember that much about yourself.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
So then how are you using it internally at Fintel to what kind of tools are you using and how are you integrating it?
We're actually developing. So I think that's probably the interesting segue. So financial services is an incredibly compliant industry. So
Yep.
people have said to me, you chose what? to do how. But really what it was about is that I like the challenge. I like being able to achieve those acquisition goals within an incredibly compliant environment where you get volume and quality. But on the other side of it, we have to make sure that we're playing within the rules.
Yeah.
We're playing within the guardrails. So we're actually developing a content policing tool using artificial intelligence. So
Yeah.
how that does is all banks are responsible for the third-party content that's displayed if there's a commercial relationship. So anything that the bank is held the standard to related to its accuracy of its interest rates or accessibility or any of those sorts of things, the marketers are required to, where there's a commercial relationship. So we're developing a tool that allows us to actually evaluate the content on the site using artificial intelligence against a rule.
Yeah.
So a rule might be an interest rate or a disclaimer, or it might be about finding a closeness on a page to a product reference to an interest rate. So we're using AI to actually look at all of those sorts of things and help as a tool bank compliance people do more.
Yeah, well, and to front end it on the marketing side, right, where you can run things through a compliance checker in advance of sending it to
That's it.
compliance to get the rubber stamp, right?
That's it. And that's what the tool's next iteration is.
Yeah.
So what you've got is you've got approval and you've got policing. So, in any campaign that we do as a marketer, you've got the two steps. You've got the approval process, and then you've got the measuring of the implementation. So we're going one step further and making sure that that data is up to date and using AI technology to do it. The way that I like to describe it is the tool is like the washing machine. You still have to have the input, you still have to do the work when it comes out, but
Right.
what we're just doing is making it a lot easier to wash those clothes or to actually synthesize all the data that's on those pages.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's fascinating. And I have a similar issue. It's not compliance, but it's around when I'm the final check for client work for being on brand and on target with message. And so I've been churning like how do I write a prompt to to include all those things. And then there's this other thing about like prompt transparency, right? Where you're able to send this prompt to somebody else to look at and say, have I included everything I need to in this in order to get the output that we're looking for, right?
So that's exactly right. And so what we're looking at is we're looking at two input variables. So we need the URL, so the destination of where the content is, and then we need the rule. And the
Yeah.
rule needs to be written in a way that it achieves, it's so clunky, like we're talking about inputs and rules and all this sort of thing with this processing these massive amounts of data as it's going through.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it will refine itself over time. Somebody related it to when you first used to put a Google prompt in,
Oh, right.
you used to put in like plumbers. I
Yeah.
just want to know where plumbers are. And then you said
Right.
plumbers in my area. And then you said plumbers that specialize in leaky taps and can come in the next 24 hours. Like
Right.
I can see that that's going to happen with the prompting of AI as we get more sophisticated and understand the output that we get from the input.
Yeah.
It'll train us as it goes along.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I've observed, at least about myself, is I'm more of a philosopher. I'm not a computer programmer, right? And so I'm only going to get so good at prompt writing because I don't want to think like that, right? Yeah,
That's exactly right. But it's sort of like, they say, good input, good output.
yeah,
So, and that's why I think AI becomes a really interesting topic, because I just think that it's not so scary as in where do you use it for its impact. It's not sort of like, it's not going to save the world from everything that it does, or take away your job or any of those sorts of things necessarily. But what it really does is it allows you to get to the end outcome much quicker. I was thinking about this the other day. All of the very big BI tools that are out there,
Yeah.
that it was sort of the first iteration of taking AI and doing something curious with it from a display perspective and a synthesization perspective.
Yeah.
So I think it iterates, but I don't think it necessarily revolutionizes in some places like that.
Yeah, and it still takes the human creative spark and the human filter to say, this. It's kind of like if I was to go to Mozambique and try to write a campaign, I'd have to have somebody who's a local to filter out the stuff that's American versus local, right?
And this is what I'm saying is it's deceptively easy, but when you're a subject matter expert, it becomes very clear about where the clunks are and where it's just way off. But
Yeah,
unless you're a subject matter expert, you probably can't see the nuance. So
right.
that's why I'm saying that I think as we evolve into it, that nuance of accuracy or that nuance of brand
Yeah,
or messaging will become much clearer. And I think the people who always had it will probably get it better and quicker because they've got tools to get them there.
yeah, and I think you're probably seeing it too, but I'm seeing so much lazy marketing that is off. It's just it's spray and pray. We're back to another one of those phases of spray and pray instead of.
But we go through. You and I both know we go through cycles.
Oh yeah, I know.
Wide and then narrow, and then wide and then narrow.
Yeah, and it is an interesting bubble, and it is interesting to see the amount of smoke screen that's out there where it's people are claiming AI and software that's just software versus being dynamic and being able to pull things in real time. So what are you seeing in the next 6 to 12 months for the work that you're doing?
Well, I think it's really interesting because we work with a whole lot of third-party marketers, right? So we
Yeah.
work with the sort of like the nerd wallets, the bank rates, the sort of like Credit Karmas of the world. And one of their phenomenal contributions, I think, to the industry is financial literacy.
Oh,
And what I get a little concerned about on the downside is that somebody that has an inkling on financial opinions and are using AI to develop content that's slightly off.
yeah,
And if that content then gets sucked into a viral something that Google starts to see, it becomes then fact when in actual fact it's not. So
yeah,
one of the good things about most of the publishers that we're working with, however they're leveraging AI for the content creation, they have the good systems and structures in place to be able to produce accurate work. So I think the ability to produce content has significantly escalated and will continue to do so. And I just think that the winners will be the ones that are able to then take that content and make sure that it's accurate and on brand and on message, as opposed to the laborious production of it. I can see all of these content writers that part-time content writers that you used to be able to find. I think their jobs are probably a little bit more diminished now, unless of course they're a subject matter expert. So I think that's how it's going to be leveraged. Anything from writing a job description to writing a campaign, looking at images and all that sort of stuff. I think it's just going to allow us to do less heavy lifting as marketers, less heavy lifting on elements of the creation and more time in the refinement of it. So a lot more easier on the content creation, and probably lot more interesting individual campaigns that can be developed by a single marketer rather than having to engage a lot of agencies to do the initial work, especially if you're a small brand or a small bank where you don't necessarily have the big budgets for third-party involvements. I think this is going to make them a little bit more creative, depending on the appetite of the publisher.
Yeah, well, that's amazing. And are there any tools that you're using internally that you found?
We're just exploring. We're actually following good protocol. We're looking at policies related to AI internally, and when we can, and how to look at it. Because I think what the thing is, like the two thing is the policy and the environment. So are you using an open environment or are you using a closed environment? And the second is the policy of when you can use it and when you can't, or when you have to citate that you've actually used for the creation of, and that sort of stuff. So we're just going through the policies now. And also I think the thing is that as an employer in the marketing area, I want the end outcome, of course, to be the good campaign or the good content, but I'm also really curious about the inputs. Before it was a search on Google that you could do, but you've got to get the data sources for your input. But now I'm curious about what my team are using to create, to be able to then discern, are you a good prompt writer with a good level of expertise, or do you know your stuff? So that's the curious thing for me. It's not in any way keeping me up at night, but I'm just curious about it, because that also allows me to understand how I see people with the work that they produce.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like a musician and a synthesizer, right? In some ways. And did they study Beethoven and Bach, or are they just jumping right in and using the synthesizer?
And both have a place. But the fact is, I'd like to be able to, as the CEO, I'd like to be able to discern what that place is.
And then, so I'm using tools that are both SSL'd and encrypted. Is there another layer of security that you've seen besides the encryption of content back and forth?
I think what it is that we've been looking at as we've been developing this tool. Like you've got commercial environments where you are paying, which is sort of like the encryption, that you're paying for the data in and the data out. We're actually also looking at creating our own specific environment for our tool. So using the encryption in one sense of the word, but then just from a commercial perspective, wanting to own that data source. And so developing our own. So I think it really depends where your business is and what it's using for. I think the encryption from a campaign perspective or from a creative element, I think is absolutely spot on. But if you're wanting to do a lot larger data crunching with sensitive information, then I think creating your own environment based on Microsoft environment or AWS's environment or whatever else is probably something. I know a lot of the banks that we're working with have created that. So that's where that comes into it.
Yeah, that sounds like it's not quite accessible yet for smaller companies, but probably.
No, well,
but it will be.
It's purposeful. Do you know what I mean? Like I wouldn't classify us as a large bank by any stretch of the imagination. But I think because the data is so important and we want the flexibility without the cost overhead, then, this is where you've got time, you've got money. The encryptedness gives you speed, and what I'm looking for is a long-term play. So, maybe it's about the time.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, Nicky, I appreciate your time this morning. And Fintel Connect, is that how do we get in touch with you over there?
Just really super, super easy, www.fintelconnect.com. And also just if you're looking at financial literacy or you're looking to grow something in the financial area, easy to find us.
Well, it's great. Thanks again for your time and insight into marketing in the age of AI. And I hope you have a great day.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Marketing in the Age of AI. Be sure to subscribe wherever you heard this podcast so you never miss a future episode. Your copy of Authentic Marketing in the Age of AI is available at Amazon.com or EmanuelRose.com. You can also connect with Emanuel on LinkedIn. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.